To a lot of Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, Lions clubs, and I start out my presentation by asking them a question. And the question is, do you think we can win the war on drugs? Now, let's define what winning war means. We won the Second World War. We don't fight the Germans and the Italians and the Japanese every once in a while. The war is over, we won it, it's done, okay? That's what one war was. So if we win the war on drugs, that means we've taken the word marijuana and heroin out of the dictionary because we've defeated the drugs, they're gone. And I ask people to raise their hands, and nobody ever puts their hand up to think that's possible.
I retired a detective lieutenant from that job. But when I retired, I felt very bad about my role in implementing what today I feel is not only a failed war on drugs, it's far worse. It's a self-perpetuating and constantly expanding
courtroom. You're churning low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose whatsoever. You are arresting some even high-level dealers. And if you do that, does that mean that heroin is no longer available on the streets of Santa Ana or wherever? No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means that somebody else sees that as an employment opportunity. And I came to the...
Most of the arrests for drugs are for possession by casual users.
7 years. They all had to serve a third of max before they could come out on parole. So 2.5 years after each one of these raids I had, another 100 young folks were coming out of prison. What were they going to do? We'd snatched them off the streets in the prime of their life when they're trying to get their education. They don't have any education. And if they did have education, who the hell's going to hire them? They're dope dealers. That's what we said they were. So what are they going to do to feed their families, huh? What they're going to do is they're going to turn right back to the drug culture, the very group we say we're trying to save them from. Only now they're going to become real, honest-to-goodness drug dealers. And for every new real drug dealer, you got to have a whole bunch of new real drug users. So every one of those folks is out there actively recruiting younger people to pick up those needles and become the next statistic. And that, folks, is how this became a self-perpetuating, constantly expanding policy disaster. There's no way to fix it. We have to end it.
That the prohibition of drugs produces, on the average, 10,000 additional homicides a year. It's a moral problem that the government is going around killing 10,000 people.
Drugs are inherently a problem for the individual who takes them, but they are a much bigger problem for society, precisely because they are illegal. It is their illegality that makes them costly and drives people to desperation to get the money by any means at anybody else's expense.
We're out there enforcing morality when we enforce drug laws, and that is not our job. We were not trained to do it. We are not capable of doing it. And if anything else, you see the failure of it. We've been doing this for over 40 years since Nixon kicked it off, and the drugs are more available, purer quality, and cheaper than they've ever been before on the streets of America. And we've had 40,000 deaths in Mexico in the last 5 years fighting over this drug trade. Plus, we've destroyed more lives than the drugs have by incarcerating people and hanging felony convictions on them and denying them college educations, denying them jobs for no good reason. And one other thing I want to point out, just in case people think that if we do it hard enough, this is actually going to be doable to make drugs go away. We have the largest prison system on the planet. And I would like to point out one of the most efficient prison systems on the planet. And in that huge, efficient prison system, we do not have one drug-free prison in America. And if you cannot keep drugs out of prison, who is going to be delusional enough to think you can keep them out of a free society?
That's how this thing became a numbers game with the police. It's all about numbers.
California, to treat marijuana like alcohol for adults. What would happen if this were to pass? Well, 6 things. The first 5 demonstrably beneficial, then we'll talk about the 6th. The first thing that would happen is we in the state of California as taxpayers literally could save hundreds of millions of dollars per year, if not $1 billion a year, that now we actually spend in a futile effort to try to eradicate marijuana as well as to prosecute and incarcerate nonviolent marijuana offenders. And of course you can tell how successful we are in the eradication of marijuana because it's still the largest cash crop in the state of California. And number 2 is grapes, by the way, if you care. So that's $1 billion or so that we can save. Number 2, we could tax the silly stuff and generate revenue, according to the chair of the State Board of Equalization, of about $1.3 billion every year. So now that's about a $2.3 billion shift in the budget deficit for the state of California. You'd think somebody would notice. But the third thing trumps the first two, and that is we would make marijuana less available for children than it is today. That is something that really does deserve a great deal of attention. Number 4, the entire hemp industry could be revitalized. It goes back thousands of years to the degree that in ancient Greek the word canvas and cannabis were synonymous. They were the same word. And we have simply thwarted that entire really important industrial purpose. We do have our merchants using hemp today, and by the way, hemp, you know, is just the stalk of the marijuana plant. It has no mind-altering properties whatsoever, but it can be used for all kinds of really beneficial purposes. So now our merchants import the raw material from those radical countries like Canada and England, for heaven's sake, penalizing ourselves and our own agricultural purposes. You'd think that we could somehow realize what's going on, because the Canadian hemp field is worth, you know, about $1 billion a year. And the fifth thing, this entire medical marijuana issue would pretty much dissolve, and hooray for that. It would get some control on it, regulate it, control it, tax it, and bring it back under the law. Then there's the sixth thing. What's that going to do to marijuana usage by adults? And any economist, of course, will tell you that's really pretty simple. It will increase marijuana use by adults. All things being equal. But all things are not going to be equal. We'll probably soon start experiencing what I call the Holland effect. Because in Holland, anybody 16 years of age or older can go to a coffee house and can get coffee and sandwiches and tea and also marijuana and hashish. The Minister of Health of Holland held a press conference not all that long ago and said, we in our country have only half the marijuana consumption per capita as you do in the United States of America, both for adults and for teenagers. Wait a minute, you hear that? Both for adults and for teenagers. Then went on to explain why. You know what he said? He said, we have succeeded in making pot boring.
Numerous surveys have found that judges believe that false testimony regarding the legitimacy of searches is a common occurrence.
The role of the government, if you look at it from a purely economic point of view, the role of the government is to protect the drug cartel. That's literally true.
Is it doing a good job with it?
Excellent. What more could a monopolist want? He's got a government who makes it very hard for all his competitors and who keeps the price of his product high. What scares me about the notion of drugs being legal?
Nothing.
What scares me is a notion of continuing on the path we're on now, which will destroy our free society.
If an addict could support his addiction for a few dollars a week, he would still be an addict, but he would not have to steal, mug, or kill other people to support his habit.
In October of that year, thanks to this funding policy from the federal government, we went from a 7-man narcotic unit to a 76-person narcotic bureau overnight. All paid for by the feds. And this was replicated across the whole United States.
What we can do as a society is to cut our losses. It is bad enough that some people destroy their own lives with drugs. We don't need to add vast numbers of innocent victims who are robbed, mugged, or murdered by addicts trying to get money for a fix.
People, to find out about these drug offenses at all, they have to employ the search power aggressively. And that in turn gives rise to nearly irresistible tendencies toward abuse. Every year there are approximately 1.4 million drug arrests. It seems to me unlikely that every case involves the voluntary disclosure of possession by a user, or an officer seeing some quantity of a drug lying in plain sight.
And when you mention other countries, I had a guy come up to me after a Rotary meeting a couple years ago, and he said to me, well, you know what they do in Saudi Arabia if they catch you with drugs? And I said, yeah, and they take you down to the town square and they chop your head off. And he said smugly, yeah, that's right. And I answered him with two answers. One was, call me crazy, but when I think of countries I want America to be more like, Saudi Arabia is not one of the first ones that pops into my head. And two, you know what they do every year in Saudi Arabia when they catch people with drugs? They take them down to the town square and they chop their head off. And you know why they do it every year? Because it doesn't work. If it worked, the rest of the people see that head rolling through the courtyard, that'd be the end of the drug problem. But even that doesn't work.